Hi, I'm Teresa from Phoenix Gate Crafts, and this time on Chat and Craft, I am crocheting, and I'm going to be talking about Gilmore Girls, relationships, generational trauma, and how, in relationships specifically, and how, in the end, none of Rory's boyfriends were going to go the distance with her, and why I think that. This is about half thought out, so here's hoping I actually tell everything and don't have to skip back and forth a little bit. I didn't write an outline, so I apologize if this is a bit scattered. Emily Gilmore is the family matriarch, and honestly, everything that's wrong with Lorelai is wrong with Emily, and everything that's wrong with Rory is what's wrong with both of them, because that's how generational trauma works. Trauma's not quite accurate in a lot of this because we really don't know any of Emily's trauma. We do know that she really wasn't prepared. Well, I extrapolate, I guess, that she really wasn't prepared for motherhood. She was prepared for being a wife in the way that she was a wife, because Emily and Richard, they went along separate parallel paths. They met at dinner. They obviously had sex, and then the whole rest of their lives were just separate. And Richard was very laissez-faire with his at-home matters, leaving Emily to run everything with minimal involvement. He just did his thing. He was content. He was fine. And Emily did everything at home. And I don't think Emily was ready for Lorelai. She wasn't aware of how to address emotional needs. She's really not very good at that. That's not her wheelhouse. She doesn't even have to do that with Richard because he's just chill to do kind of whatever. He wants something, she does it, end of discussion, which is not a very healthy way of having a marriage. And eventually it does break down because she finds out that he'd been having lunches with his ex-fiancé for decades without informing her. And they realize that by not communicating effectively, they at some point kind of stopped communicating. And Lorelai saw that, realized it never really worked, and didn't want that for herself. But because Lorelai got pregnant, had a baby, moved out on her own, that there's a trauma that happens there. I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or anything, but my understanding is that when the big tragedy happens in your life, you emotionally kind of stop there. You as a general you, not you specifically. So Lorelai kind of mentally stopped at 16, which is why in the beginning of the Gilmore Girls show, she is not a very mature person. By being the kind of sheltered she was, by acting out, by not having her emotional needs met by her mom, and winding up in the position she found herself in. And her response to that, she grew up real quick, but she also didn't mature after that. And that wound up really affecting how she was raised, really wound up affecting how she raised Rory. And I think that generally speaking, she was a good mom. She did basically gentle parenting. She really addressed her daughter's emotional needs. She kind of went the opposite direction her mom did, where her mom didn't address any emotional needs. But by addressing all of them and not allowing Rory to really struggle with anything, because anytime there was a challenge for Rory, she does step in, which is kind of a weakness, because something I learned with my husband is that when you don't allow a child to have some struggle, sheltered, controlled struggle, they don't build skills to deal with difficulties. Rory doesn't deal with very much struggle throughout her childhood. Her first big struggle with academics is by dealing with Paris once she's 16 and is at Chilton. And she's getting her first ever D, and she doesn't handle it well. And then they do come up with a plan, and she manages to rise to the new challenge very quickly. And by dealing with Paris and her adversarial nature, crazy bitch, she deals with it, and it's not a struggle for more than a year or so. In fact, she becomes Paris's best friend. And that happens fairly quickly. And then the thing is, because she didn't really struggle at a young age, I see this a lot as a tutor. My students who struggle younger have better tools for handling similar struggles later, because things just get harder as you move on. I have a friend who didn't struggle our entire childhood and when we were teens, and when he got into college, everything just fell apart around him because he didn't have coping mechanisms. He didn't have strategies for dealing with teachers who didn't like you, or for a subject matter you're just not naturally clicking with, because he'd always clicked with everything. And as a result, he wound up flunking out, kind of like Rory. So that's kind of the problem that Rory has. And because her mom never brought home guys. It's a big thing she says with Max Medina is that Lorelai had never brought home guys. She never had relationships in front of Rory. And I do agree with that, because if you're only having one night stands and flings, there's no need to bring that into your child's life, because that will provide an instability. But it also means that she never saw her mom developing relationships, never having long-lasting relationships. And having, yes, a good, stable, working relationship next door is not the same as seeing it day in, day out, and dealing with the emotional repercussions of things with your at home. It's a different thing. Just like reading romance is different than actually experience romance. So Rory did not have a foundation for a good, healthy, working, romantic relationship that could go the distance, because the two that she had examples of for her own life, one was non-existent and the other really wasn't functional. So as a result, Rory's relationships falling apart makes sense. And it's not all on the guys. Now let's look at them one by one, starting with the first one, Dean. And honestly, who doesn't love the train wreck that is Sam from Supernatural? Seriously, he's pretty. And I'm going to debunk some of the initial criticisms that are in a lot of the videos I've watched about this subject. Dean does not have to have the same interests as Rory. In fact, your romantic partner should not have all the same interests as you, because you are different people. You need to have different interests. And so I am totally fine with the fact that Dean does not read the same way that Rory does. It's totally okay that he doesn't have her main interest. They had other interests. They did other stuff. They'd go out to eat, and clearly they found stuff to talk about. Just because he's not interested in books doesn't mean that he's not interested in talking to her about whatever she's reading right now, or her day, or going and watching movies with her, which he clearly did. They found other stuff to enjoy. They went to town events together. And although she clearly loved it more than he did, it's something that they could do together and talk about. He was a good first boyfriend. But here's the thing with first boyfriends, they are not meant to be your last boyfriend most of the time. The people who marry their high school sweethearts or their first loves are few and far between, because so much of the time, that's not how it works. And it didn't there. And they grew apart, and that's okay. And honestly, Rory was not really super ready for the things she faced in that relationship. And people are like, oh my gosh, Dean, quick to anger. He wasn't quick to anger. He was quick to frustration. And considering he wasn't getting his needs met, it is honestly understandable that he would feel frustration. And yeah, he had a model of the working dad and the stay-at-home mom. That's the way he expected a relationship to work. And yeah, that is kind of why they wouldn't have worked in the first place. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't good for her for a first boyfriend that's not really meant to last. Because what happens with your first relationship is just like with your first job. You learn what you want in a relationship. You learn kind of how relationships function. It's a learning experience. And that's exactly what Rory got out of it, was how to be a girlfriend, what she wanted in a relationship. And she learned how to recognize things she didn't like in a relationship. And the fact that it fell apart, Dean, quote unquote, changed. Yeah, there was a bit of a character assassination because of writers. We're going to have to deal with a lot of that in the entire thing because it's a TV show and it's a drama-based TV show, which means that if the stakes aren't raised, people lose interest. So we're going to just have to deal with the fact that writers are a factor in this. But pretending writers aren't, Season 2 honestly makes a lot of sense because Dean was not the most secure in the relationship for good reason. He tells Rory after 3 months of dating that he loves her, and she doesn't friggin' respond. She says, oh, okay, and backs off. They break up for a while after that until she's able to finally say she loves him. People, please realize she did fuck up relationship-wise there because she wasn't emotionally ready for the big L word, leaver. No, I'm just kidding. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air reference there. But she wasn't ready for that. She didn't step up. She's not responsible for his reactions and his responses. He is, but his responses make sense when she doesn't reciprocate in kind most of the time. And there's this thing, especially with the Max Medina thing and the Dean thing, that kind of, you could tell this was written by a woman primarily, because there's this kind of way that relationships are written in the show that if a dude isn't a doormat, he's not a good guy. And we want guys to be nice, but we don't want guys to sacrifice themselves for a relationship either. It's a delicate balance that is not reached with Dean. Like, if he's not a doormat, he's not a good guy. And you don't want guys to do that. I had a friend in one of my first jobs who was a doormat. And there's this expectation that because he's nice, he is owed something. And that is not how relationships work or function either. And ultimately, in the end, Dean and Rory weren't a perfect fit. They didn't grow together. They went in separate directions because he really wanted a housewife. And that's not what Rory wanted. And she wanted somebody who was a little bit more exciting than Dean. And he just wasn't like that. And they were going to break up eventually anyway. And I think that that was fine. The fact that Rory got interested in Jess, obsessed over Jess, and didn't fucking break up with Dean, that's a low blow. The fact that it got to a point where he was overcompensating, becoming more and more of a doormat, trying to compensate for the fact that he could feel that he was losing her in the second season. No, that was not a healthy dynamic. And had they actually communicated, because you'll find that in all of this, communication is not Rory's strong suit. And expressing herself is something that she kind of learns, but honestly doesn't really. yeah, she should have just broken up with him and been clear about, I'm not feeling this anymore. Because the minute you're not feeling it anymore, you need to communicate. Because sometimes, yeah, there is something you can do about it. I need to do more stuff with you. I think I need more. Pardon me, my phone just went off. What was I saying? Because, yeah, you need to communicate. If things are getting boring, if you're feeling the status quo isn't exciting anymore, communicating with your partner is a key to reviving things and figuring out what is lacking in your relationship. If the two of you could change something and make it more interesting for the both of you, or realizing, no, you know what, this really isn't good for me. Maybe we should end it. It's a conversation worth having. And honestly, if you're both really dedicated to the relationship, you both can kind of figure out a way around whatever problem or lack of problems are happening that make it more interesting. And so, yeah, I think Lorelai. So, yeah, I think Rory really did learn a lot about relationships. Well, she should have learned a lot about relationships in that relationship, but she did not, because her learning and growing from it would have been boring TV. And Jess is totally different. Now, I don't think Jess, I think he's a good character. I don't think that Jess is a good boyfriend, because he was a train wreck. He was not in a good place. And I'm not saying you have to be in a great place emotionally for a relationship to work, but he also had no relationship skills. His relationship with Shane, which was basically just making out everywhere, it's not a relationship. It was what it was, and then he ended it when he got with Rory, but it's a totally different thing with a girlfriend who wants to be a girlfriend, whose end goal is quite clearly marriage. And he didn't do what he needed to do in those situations, and Rory didn't talk to him about it, express what she needed in no uncertain terms. She had the same problems with Jess that she had with Dean, which was not expressing her needs in the relationship and talking about what she wanted, until she reached a breaking point when he wasn't making plans with her and wasn't calling because he got busy and he didn't know what to do. And as a result, him just kind of hitting rock bottom and leaving it. Yeah, I know. He was supposed to have a spin-off show that never took off. But friendly reminder, that's not what we're talking about. But the fact that all of his growth happened off screen, the fact that, he never communicated, he just left. He wasn't ever in a good place for her when they were together. And because she could never communicate with him what she wanted, and when she did, he was receptive to it. It doesn't matter the fact that they were interested in reading and very similar books. And a real quick note on that, my husband and I, this is our 15th year together, and our 9th year of marriage is coming up. We're not interested in the exact same things. I love reading. I really identified with Rory because she is 1 year older than me, and I love reading. She has absolute shit taste in books. None of those books are interesting that she's ever read, except for maybe the Harry Potter book. I'm super duper a fantasy girly. But anyway, Andy doesn't like reading. He doesn't like reading fiction. But do you know what he does enjoy? He enjoys watching TV shows that are sci-fi or fantasy or comedies. We have very similar taste in movies and TV. Pretty much anything I've introduced him to, he's enjoyed, with limitations. He's not a John Wayne buff. But we just recently watched Home Improvement together. We finished the whole show. We've watched Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Resident Alien, The Dragon Prince, Avatar: The Last Airbender. We have a lot of shows that we watch And some of them we watch over and over again together. There's stuff we do like together. We like ballroom dancing. I prefer ballet and tap, but you know what? We can do that together and have fun. We enjoy eating dinner together. There's a lot of places that we come together. We have a puppy together. We don't have to have our main interest together. Like, he loves IT and fiddling with his computer and his computer games. I like Legend of Zelda and Shadow of the Colossus. We don't have to have all the same interests. And when I am reading something he's interested in, like I am currently reading Star Trek Deep Space Nine Emissary, which is the novelization of the first 2 episodes of the show, I am explaining how the book is different and from the show, and how I think they did it based off of the script, not off of watching the episode, because there's a lot of things that are different, and clearly there were some deleted scenes. And he listens and he's interested, and we have conversations about it, because if we're always doing and enjoying the same things, there comes a point where we run out of stuff to talk about. But those differences, we should be a Venn diagram of personalities, where there's stuff we like together and then there's stuff we like separate, and that's how we have things to talk about. And the running theme is Rory doesn't communicate with her boyfriends until things reach a critical mass. And whenever she does actually communicate what she wants, decisions get made. And it holds true with Logan. Logan wasn't interested in a permanent boyfriend-girlfriend commitment. Rory wanted that. She tried the friends with benefits thing. It didn't work for her. She communicated. He did eventually decide, you know what? This is worth trying something different. He did. And here's the thing. Rory, this is where Rory being sheltered does come to play, because she was a bit over-sheltered and didn't have to struggle quite enough in the protected way where she dealt with her own shit. And so I don't think she really had the skills to be at Yale. And it doesn't help that being in a prestigious Ivy League setting, like, that is one of the hardest ones to go into. Like, college is hard no matter what, because all of a sudden you're living on your own in a way you weren't before, even if you were parentified, like Rory kind of was in some ways, because she was kind of the responsible one when it came to chores and everything. But having to manage yourself, like, her mom made so many accommodations whenever she was like, I have to study. Her mom's like, cool, I will help you with this and make sure everything runs smoothly so you can attend the thing you need. Because anytime Rory needed something, things went on hold for Rory's needs. And now all of a sudden she's in an environment where things don't go on hold when Rory needs them. She doesn't adjust to it well, because Rory is not a flexible thinker. It takes a lot to get her around to thinking flexibly and adjusting as needed. And that's ultimately how a lot of this kind of comes to fruition, because she doesn't handle Yale well. This is a lot like one of my husband's cousins who never really built life skills when he was at home. And every time he went away to college, like when he did junior college and was living at home, he did just fine. But every single time he went away, all of a sudden he was dealing with having to make friends. He was having to deal with new environments and having to be flexible and adjustable and deal with teachers he didn't like and get his shit done anyway. Or deal with a person or a friend that he doesn't get along with, or problems, and he just wasn't trained to be flexible enough to deal with that. And as a result, he flunked out twice. And he's in his mid-20s. He doesn't have a degree to show for it. He's never had a job. And all of a sudden, he's not able to make life work out, because a lot of these skills are things you build and you're supposed to learn from them. It's kind of funny. I hear this in a lot of religious circles, but I've heard this in non-religious circles, and it doesn't make sense to me, because it's this concept of you keep facing the same things until you learn from your mistakes. I don't think that's quite true, because you are actually exposed to every possibility, and who you are kind of brings that to you, because you allow into your life what you allow into your life. What you are attracted to is what you reach for. So you like the exciting guy who kind of pulls you out of your comfort zone the way Rory's does. You're going to reach for that every single time, which means you're reaching for bad boys, right? That's your type. Dean looks like a bad boy, and for somebody as sheltered and goody-goody as Rory is in the beginning, the fact that he wears a leather jacket in the pilot episode is, the whole thing is exciting. Everything is new. Then Jess, who is more bad boy in an actual bad boy thing. And that is exciting. It provides that dopamine rush. But that's not a good situation to be in. And then you've got Logan, who's even more exciting, even more of a bad guy, even more loose. Because remember, you need more gratification for this thing that you're subconsciously searching for. She had all these other opportunities. She meets a bunch of different guys throughout the series, most of whom she's not particularly interested in. Yeah, everybody's like, oh, there was Tristan at Chilton, but what about that dork dude who looked a lot like Jonathan Taylor Thomas, who wound up super into musicals? He was never portrayed as a romantic option, but he kind of was an option, but she was never interested in that. There were lots of guys throughout that she could have met, that she worked with. They could have written in more guys who were potential mates, who just became friends. They didn't. But in real life, every guy you meet is a potential boyfriend. You just don't always find all of them interested and don't see them as potential partners. And that's what Rory did. She has a type, she reached for it, and because she didn't learn from her mistakes, she didn't learn to recognize the problems. She did do a little bit better with Logan, but she fell into the exact same trap of not communicating what she wants, kind of losing herself a little bit in this relationship, realizing it didn't work for her, hitting a breaking point, then communicating, and then things kind of working out because she communicated. And you combine that with the fact that she wasn't really emotionally ready for being on her own the way that she was at Yale. And things come to a critical head. And I don't think Logan was really good for her. He was in the pit of his own personal hell at the time. And a friendly reminder that he was an act out in a bad way type. So when Rory suggests, let's just steal a boat, because she had her heart broken in a way, she received criticism that wasn't constructive criticism. Yes, Mitchum Huntsberger could have handled her better. I think he was a little valid. He was also super not valid. Oh no, now I have to talk about that. So Rory got this internship. She was not given a duty statement, so she didn't know what task she was supposed to do. She did her best kind of making it up on her own, but friendly reminder, she doesn't ask questions. She doesn't communicate. That part was on her to clarify what duties she was supposed to be doing and what was expected of her. Please excuse my phone. And then she didn't meet his idea of what she was expected. He told her so, didn't give her any ways to improve. So it was just this big old heartbreak that nobody really helped her through and started asking questions and giving her good advice of, well, why don't you go back and ask? You said I don't have it, but what can I do to improve? How can I gain it? This unspoken thing that I don't have. You didn't really describe the end goal. What should I have done to be better? Because what expectation didn't I meet? Because this actually happened to me in my second ever job. I kept getting passed up for promotion. I worked as a barista. And then this guy, we'll call him Dante, was hired and promoted within the same semester he was hired. And he was a shit supervisor, did not do any of the tasks. And I was like, why did I not get this? I complained to my mom about it, and she said, well, ask. Say, what can I do to improve so that next time I'm not passed over for promotion? And then whatever they say, you do it, and you make sure they see you do it. And so I did that. I asked my boss, I keep getting passed over for promotion. I think I'm doing a pretty good job. What can I do to improve so that I don't get passed over? He took a week, discussed it with a bunch of different people, got 3 main criticisms, and we sat down and he talked to me about it. I took it very seriously, and within a week, I made sure he saw a notable improvement. And I wound up running into him at the grocery store during break. This was working at a college campus, so we had winter intersession. And he's like, hey, did you check your Facebook? I messaged you, and are you still interested in promoting to supervisor? I said, yes. And so I wound up going over and finding the message, because back in the day, Facebook was not on your phone. So I had to go look for it, and I officially responded via Facebook Messenger that yes, I want a promotion. And so we arranged training. And you know what? I proved that I was receptive to training, and I was ready to be independent as a supervisor, completely on my own within 3 weeks. Average was 6 weeks. And by the way, I was told Dante took longer than 6 weeks. He never really got good at it. So yes, communication, being open to critique, getting critique, that's how that should have gone. And that's not how it went with Mitchum Huntsberger. So yeah, Rory was heartbroken, understandably. The whole thing did not go well. But her natural response, because, this was in the fall of Rory, so her response was, let's deal a boat. And Logan said, are you sure? Which was, a lot of people put too much emphasis on that, are you sure? And she said yes. And what he should have said is, how about instead we just get shit-faced? Let's get drunk. What's going on? Why are you upset? There were a lot of different ways he could have done that instead of, are you sure? Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, let's steal a boat. And then they get caught and bullshit happens. He didn't help her correct. And is it a boyfriend, significant other's job to correct? Yes. Yes, it is. That's what my husband does with me. I have a problem. I have something going on at work that I don't know how to handle. And I am the more aggressive of the two of us. He brings me back down, and between talking with him and talking to my mom and talking to my bestie, but getting these different perspectives from people who respond to things differently, I'm usually able to come up with a really good response to something, or a better way to handle it than what I am naturally inclined to. That is what the people in your life are supposed to do. They're not supposed to just blatantly agree with you. They're not supposed to doormat. Yeah, there is a certain amount of, oh, this sucks, let's have ice cream. But there's also a good amount of, let's talk this through and figure out something, a better way to handle this. What should you learn for next time? That does not happen for Rory. It's always, oh, I am so sorry. Let's wallow. Wallowing happens the first night, maybe for a week. It doesn't happen longer than that, because then you get up and you figure out the learning part of it. Because, yeah, you're going to be exposed to the same thing. You reach for the same thing until you learn to recognize the warning signs and you learn how to handle it. Because yes, you put yourself in that situation, you learn how to recognize the badness of it. And so every relationship, every job should be different, because you learned the warning signs last time and you learn the better way to handle it for next time. Life is nothing but learning until you are able to recognize the good things and prevent the bad things from happening. That's how life goes. And because of the drama, Rory never learns. And so, yeah, she really does sink low. And I don't think dropping out of Yale is the worst thing to have happened. Rory and her mom miscommunicating is the bad thing that happened there. Because Rory doesn't communicate until shit hits the fan. Right? It's her theme. By the way, Lorelai does it too in her relationships. And although she is more proactive in her communication, neither of them communicate particularly well. And this is totally, again, Emily doesn't communicate well. None of them really communicate what they want. And none of them listen well either. But yeah, no, Logan was never particularly good for Rory. He did this big dramatic shift into boyfriend material, but he became this, stopped challenging her, never really, I don't know how to explain it. He challenged her until he didn't, and he never challenged her in the right ways. They never established really good communication. And so, like, the fact that Logan surprised Rory with a public proposal, which, by the way, don't publicly propose unless you are absolutely certain the other person is going to say yes. Because you should have that marriage conversation first. They never had that marriage conversation first. And because they don't talk about this stuff, he was blindsided. She said no. She was valid to say no. Like, my husband and I mean, technically my husband never proposed. He and I had talked about it. Earlier in the day, we'd had a very serious conversation about our relationship, how it would work. The fact that I didn't want to necessarily get married right then. I didn't feel we were ready for marriage. We had a 6-year relationship before we actually got married. But we'd been together at that point for about 3 years, and I wanted to be engaged, and I was fine with a long engagement. And later that night, my husband was leaving, and he went out to his car. He came back and said, "Here, hold on to this for me." And he put a box into my hand. And I was like, what? Is there a problem with the cufflinks that I had given him? And I opened it, and it was his class ring, not his cufflinks. So I looked at him. We're standing in the doorway with the screen open. And I said, "Does this mean we're engaged?" And he said, yeah, we're engaged. And I smile and I kiss him. And then the cat escaped. And we managed to catch her by the time she got to the rose bushes. But that's how we became engaged. Technically, he did not propose. And he did later get me my ring. That was my engagement ring. And we used that same ring for my wedding band. And I got him a ring that became his engagement ring. That became his wedding ring. So, romantic story, yes, but also communication based. And he knew I was going to say yes because I'd already clearly communicated that I wanted to become engaged. And just for clarity, he got his first real stable job like over a year later. And 15 months after that is when we got married. So, timing is important, but the communication and actually being ready for it. Like, I think our marriage is on very stable ground because we communicate. When we have a problem, we talk about it and we fix things. And part of talking is also listening. And Rory never learned this lesson, because if you learn this lesson, you don't have good drama. And as a result of not learning this lesson, Rory's in the same place, kind of arguably a worse place, in the revival. And I gotta say, Rory, her fall from grace, the thing is, it's very relatable because, like I said, I was never Rory, but I always felt akin to Rory. I liked to read. I was not the most out there, kind of an introvert. My best friend was an extrovert who adopted me. So, like, I always felt like I was always a year behind her in a lot of things. And with the job market, something that never gets mentioned in the show is the fact that when I graduated from college with my bachelor's in December of 2009, this was after the big housing market crash of 2007. So I couldn't find a job. All entry-level positions were requiring 5 to 7 years of experience. And I didn't know you kind of twist things to give yourself more experience. So, yeah, I didn't find a job in marketing. I wound up working in coffee for the next 6 years, and then I became a tutor. I did a little bit of freelance marketing for a while, and now I'm trying to find my first real marketing job. I now have my MBA in marketing. I'm 38, in case anybody actually needed to know that. So 2004, I graduated high school 2004, and I 2009 to 2025. That's math. 25 minus 9 is 16. It's been 16 years. And I've never had an official marketing job. Now, it's not that I haven't done any marketing. I own my own business. I've promoted myself in several different things. I have marketing experience. It's just a matter of communicating that experience is tricky. And I can totally see how you don't wind up in the industry you got an education for, and how difficult the job market is. Because, like, my parents, I know this isn't where you thought this would go, right? My dad's nearly 90 and my mom is in her 70s. So both of them, when they got their jobs, you went to a business, you applied in person. You could talk to somebody and persuade them to you. It is entirely done online now. And honestly, I don't think writing thank you notes necessarily helps. I mean, it's a good practice to be into, but I don't think any thank you note I've ever sent to somebody for an interview has ever gotten me that job. It's very different now. And this really came to a head when my dad took me to a job fair. And we went around to a few of the booths together. Like, he dropped me off, parked the car, came in. And we hit up a few booths kind of together. And every single one, I didn't hand over a single one of my resumes that I'd brought. Every single one told me to apply online, just gave me some information about that job. And on the way back, I think we stopped for lunch, and he said, I am so sorry I made you do this. This was a waste of time. Because job fairs are now. Because you don't get a job at a job fair. You just find out about different places to apply to, which, by the way, I can do just as well on Indeed or LinkedIn. So It's a numbers game. It's more a numbers game now than it ever used to be. And although it's not a stated fact, I really sympathize with where Lorelai. I really sympathize with where Rory is in the revival, because I'm here, 38, my business failed, never got that industry job I was promised, and trying to look for a permanent full-time job in an economy that's just so hard to find a job in. And people act as if this realism is awful, and that's why it feels awful. It's real. We don't want our entertainment to feel real. We want it to be different. We want there to be a hope that doesn't actually exist in real life. And that's why everybody's like, which boyfriend do we ship Rory with? Well, realistically speaking, none of them were good. They all should have broken up. If she had wound up married to any of them, regardless of whether she cheated with Dean, none of them were set up to be long-term successful relationships. She never developed the communication skills to make a relationship or a job last. And yeah, you could say it was because she was entitled. You could say whatever you want. The fact is, Rory never learned to communicate effectively. And as a result, she was always surprised when things didn't work out the way she wanted, because her desires were never stated. And I mean, I just had an interview. They wanted to put me at a time that didn't work because I had to work at that time slot. And the other available time slots were all not something I was available for. And I asked for a different time slot. I gave my availability and asked for something within that. And they accommodated it. And we had a really good phone interview. I really hope I get an in-person interview from that. But I never would have been able to have that interview if I had not asked for an accommodation. And I don't get what I want from my husband. Like, I tease him and tell him he needs to work on his psychic skills. But if he doesn't know that I want him to pick up dinner, why is he going to go and pick up dinner? Speaking of, I need to text my husband that I need him to pick up dinner tonight. But he's not going to know until I text him. So anyway, my thoughts and feelings on Rory Gilmore that are super prescient and important. And, well, I hope you enjoyed this. And you know what? If you haven't seen Gilmore Girls and made it through this without being completely confused, go watch the show. It's entertaining, even though I wind up yelling at the TV every time Rory gets into college, because as somebody who has now gone through college, I know where she screws up in that too. Anyway, happy crafting. Bye.